Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I've got a fabulous guest, Mr. Matt Bocci, with me now. He's the author of the new book, Sway, and this is actually the first memoir by a child of 9/11 who lost someone on that day. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you for having me, Sonora. I appreciate it.
Of course. Now, this, I've read kind of the summary of your book, on the website, and it's not even out yet. It's coming out September 8th, but there is so much included in this book. I feel like you've been through just so much.
Yeah, there was, it was a long process, but it was important for me there were so many events that happened that led to, they were just compounding events that led to me finally getting my story out there. And it's part of who I am. So I'm trying to, share my story with the world. And for me, it's, I may be unique in the fact that 9/11 wasn't the be all or end all for me. I had other events that happened and transpired in the years to follow that really shaped and molded who I am today.
Yeah, so let's just kind of start at the beginning, I guess. So it was your father who passed away.
Yeah, my dad died. So my dad worked on the 105th floor of the North Tower. He worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, and, I knew a few things from 9/11, the day of 9/11 and the days that followed. And these were told to me by my mother. So the first thing that I knew was I knew I found out later, leading up to 9/11, my dad was talking about quitting. He was not happy at work. He wanted to try to find his true passion in life. And so basically that morning when my mom received a phone call from him, it was on his cell phone. He called from his cell phone. Ironically, what many people don't know is that cell service in the World Trade Center, especially where my father was, even though he was so close to an antenna at the top of the North Tower, the cell service was terrible in the building. So he always called from his desk phone. And so when my mother received the phone call from his cell phone, she thought, intuitively, I guess he finally walked out. And so he called and told her, playing at the building, and she thought he was pulling a prank on her because he liked to joke around. And so the line went out, and then they kept calling each other back and forth. He eventually got back in touch with her and essentially said goodbye. His brother, my uncle, saw what was going on soon enough. He was also able to finally get in touch with my father, and he also said goodbye. To our knowledge, to this day, that those are the only people my uncle was the last person who spoke to my father. That is what we believe. And so I knew those two phone calls at the time. And then, I got pulled out of school, I didn't get pulled out of school. I came home from school. Everyone else got pulled out of school. They kept us in. And so when I got home that day, my brother and I, it was just a mass chaos-filled scene. People all around the house, people on cell phones, house phones, calling hotlines and stuff. And then a week later, so still it didn't really seem real. I had seen some of the footage and stuff, but it still didn't seem real. And then a week later, they came and told us that they found him, and then things started to kind of set in then.
Yeah. So, you were 9 when all of this happened? How do you even process this as a 9-year-old?
I definitely handled it differently than I feel a lot of my friends who also lost dads on 9/11 did. I saw some of the footage that day, and for me, it was something that affected me. I was fascinated by it in a sense. Obviously, as a 9-year-old kid, when you see what was happening that day, even as adults, I'm sure it was surreal to people. So for whatever reason, it just seemed to be ingrained into my brain. And I just was, like I said, fascinated in a sense by it. So I began asking questions really quickly. My brother Nick and I were calling my dad's cell phone. We were naive and we didn't know at the time, we had no idea. And so we were begging him to come home and stuff, and leaving all these voicemails on his phone, and to the point that we filled his mailbox. And then in those earlier, like the early years after 9/11, like when I was 10, 11, that's when I really started to like dig into what happened. I tried figuring out what happened. And I was looking at pictures and videos and looking through books that had timeline photos of the day, looking on on our family computer, and I still don't think I processed it the way many other people would. I knew, obviously, a week later when they came and told us, I was obviously aware, yeah, my father passed away, my father's dead. But it almost didn't seem real until maybe after the funeral a little bit, you know? And then, like I said, in the years to follow, that's when I look back now and I see my grieving process sort of like transform a little bit and shift into different ways. And, you know, I expressed my grieving in a different way than I think a lot of people did, especially my mother. My mom and I had totally different takes on grieving regarding 9/11.
So you mentioned, just doing years of research. You basically started researching this and trying to find everything out about this from a very young age. So what was that moment where you realized, hey, I gotta put this down. I gotta write a book?
Well, so, there were so many things that happened in those years. Obviously, I was told that my father had jumped, and then that led into sexual abuse. And then I went down a path of drug abuse and alcohol abuse for years. And I've been in and out of treatment centers and I was almost forced to go. So it didn't really have an effect on me. And then I had a bottom of my own where I ended up having a spiritual experience and a sign from my father that essentially prompted me to say, you know what, enough's enough, and I'm going to give this a true shot. So I finally got sober just over 5 years ago. And when I got sober, I was about, I'd say 7-8 months sober. I started speaking at high schools, and then I began telling my story. And each time I was telling my story, in the beginning it was 9/11, drug abuse, here I am today. Then I started getting deeper and deeper, a little bit more vulnerable, talking about the sexual abuse, talking about the fact that I'm open about those things, and I talk about those events that happened to me and what I went through. And not only talk about it, but try to shed light on the fact that it doesn't define me. So people started coming up to me and saying, hey, maybe you should write a book and tell your story, talk about your experiences. And I kind of laughed it off. And, when I was a kid, I journaled a lot. My mom's brother had purchased me a journal for Christmas. He gave it to me. And so I started journaling as a kid. And then in high school, I wrote a lot of poetry, but I never considered myself a true writer. I didn't write a lot of creative writing as a kid and into college and stuff. So I said, you know what? All right, let me give this a shot. And I sort of viewed it as journaling all over again. And I started putting pen to paper, and then, fast forward a couple of years, and here I am today.
You put it out there in your book. What do you hope people take from it once they read it?
My main message and goal with getting my story out there now is I'm trying to inspire people, not due to my story, but due to the honesty that I had and I share in my story, because I think a lot of people are affected by similar events, maybe not 9/11 specifically, but trauma, loss, some sort of tragedy, and people don't like to talk about it, and they feel they're stigmatized, or they don't want to be vulnerable. And I think my true healing and recovery started when I did start to get honest about those things and really did get raw and get all my emotions out on the table. And so my main goal is to say, look, if you are struggling, it does get better. And if you have this little slimmer of hope left, hold on to that hope, because it will get better, and that you can overcome anything that you've gone through.
Fantastic message, Matt. Thank you so very much for joining us. A reminder, his book comes out September 8th. So how can people find you, contact you, and buy your book?
Well, to contact me, find me, I have my website. It's MatthewJohnBocci.com. You can find me on social media, on my Instagram, Facebook. To buy my book, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Apple Books. It's everywhere.
As it should be, everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Matt, so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.